Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm not going to make you all look at me for the next couple minutes, and hopefully another screen will be up. Okay. Okay, hi, good evening. I think we're going to get the town hall started now. As I said before, I'm Mayor Barbara Ann Keffer. I wanted to welcome everyone to tonight's webinar on the American Rescue Plan funding that we've received and that we will receive on we'll receive another block of that next year. But before we start discussing the plan, I do want to just talk real quickly about the helicopter accident on Monday. And I wanted to thank everybody in our community for all they did to support, the accident victims, and our police and fire departments did a great job. Also working with the county emergency management, and it just nothing short of a miracle. And it's a national story, and it looks like everybody's going to be okay. So getting back to tonight's topic, last March, President Biden and Congress approved the American Rescue Spending Act of 2021, and that provided resources for fiscal recovery due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Included in the act was direct funding for state and local governments. And as we all know, we're still being affected by COVID. For instance, tomorrow, the Springfield Hospital will be closing their ER temporarily as a result of a surge in the COVID cases. So I'd like to, ask everyone to continue to stay safe and take good care of yourselves and each other as we continue to work together to get through this difficult time. As in all things, our community is stronger when we stick together. Tomorrow at the Watkins Senior Center from 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. there will be a vaccination clinic. And also this Sunday from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. there'll be a vaccination clinic at the Gariford Firehouse on Edmonds Avenue. So one of this administration's top priorities for this funding is to acknowledge and thank our township employees who have been working hard to keep everyone safe and keep everything running smoothly for the last 2 years. I simply cannot say enough about our people in all of the departments and how they've handled an ever-changing and nerve-wracking environment. As you will hear later in the presentation, premium pay for these workers is an important part of the plan, as it will not only serve to recognize the workers and their hard and steady work, but it will also help to stimulate our local economy. Our proposed program is currently more generous than what has been seen in our neighboring municipalities. Upper Darby has already received its first round of funding through the American Rescue Plan. This funding is to combat the negative effects of the pandemic, as well as to make infrastructure improvements to lessen the impact of future emergencies and possible pandemics. I'm looking forward to hearing the community's input and feedback as we propose spending for these funds. We are seeking, as much public feedback as possible to determine how best to reinvest in our community. That being said, the federal government has very strict guidelines on how these resources can be spent. This money can be spent to respond to the effects of the pandemic on nonprofits, small businesses, and households. It can be used to provide premium pay to eligible workers performing essential services, which is pretty much all of our employees. It could be used to replace revenue from the provisions of government services lost due to the pandemic. And the money can be used to make necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So all expenses for this money will ultimately be approved by Township Council, and it will need to fall within federally approved guidelines. So I look forward to your questions and input. During the webinar, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to ask questions. And then after the presentation has concluded, we will begin answering questions as time allows. So this plan, I think, is a good mix of above ground and below ground projects. And this ARPA money presents a historic opportunity to get ahead of some critical deferred maintenance, as well as to rebuild our current assets. So I'd like to turn it over for the details to our CAO, Vincent Rangioni.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mayor Keffer. I really appreciate your remarks and your leadership here. Thank you to everyone from the public who's attending this virtual town hall meeting. We really appreciate your participation, and obviously, just like with so many things over the last 2 years, we would prefer to be in person and be able to share a common space with you and interact in real time. But this pandemic continues, and so we are happy to be able to provide this virtual town hall format. We've been taking in questions from the public for about a week, and as the mayor mentioned, we will continue to take in questions through the Q&A function of this Zoom platform while we proceed. Before I go further, I also want to echo the mayor's sentiments with regard to the unfortunate and miraculous helicopter crash landing that happened on Monday. The one sort of tidbit that I would like to add is I've been interacting with the national media and also the National Investigative Services from the NTSB and the FAA. And I just want to point out that all the folks who have come from Washington, D.C. and Maryland and from those federal agencies can simply not say enough about our first responders and our public works department. Our police and fire service have done an amazing job of managing the scene. Our public works crews have done an incredible job of supporting the effort to secure the scene and make it a place where those federal authorities can conduct their investigation. And they've really received an incredible amount of praise. So I did want to point that out because Upper Darby really showed itself well during that incident. And one other way that Upper Darby showed itself incredibly during the incident was the residents who responded. The literal first responders were everyday Upper Darby residents who happened to be on the scene or near the scene, who provided the initial assistance to the flight crew and the pilot. And so that was really an incredible thing that we can say about our community and feel really good about our neighbors who participated and helped there. So I did want to say thank you to all of those folks, and of course to the pilot who did an incredible job avoiding the loss of life and property damage. In terms of the main topic of tonight's meeting, the American Rescue Plan, I think the mayor did a good job of giving us a broad outline. As she mentioned, in March of 2021, President Biden passed the American Rescue Plan Act. That was a $1.9 trillion stimulus package meant to mitigate the effects of the pandemic, not just the public health effects, but also the economic impacts. And as we know, in all crises, but certainly in this one, oftentimes the economic impacts are more strongly felt in historically underserved communities, communities of color, immigrant communities. And we certainly have those communities as part of our larger community here in Upper Darby. So I know that all of us have felt the impacts this pandemic, and my family is certainly no exception, and our family here of Upper Darby Township employees is certainly not an exception. Contained within that $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan is the coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. And believe it or not, they do actually have an acronym for that, SLFRF, which, you know, doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but nevertheless, coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. So that's a $350 billion part of the American Rescue Plan that has been allocated to help state, local, and tribal governments across the country support their response to the COVID-19 health emergency and also the economic impacts. That $350 billion is meant to do a couple of different things in broad terms. First is fight the pandemic and support families and businesses struggling with its public health and economic impacts. Second is maintain vital public services, even amid declines in revenue. And fortunately, Upper Darby has not seen the same kinds of declines in revenue as some other local governments that have a different taxing formula. But I will talk more about the lost revenue portion of the plan in a few minutes. And the third, and in some ways most long-lasting and important, is to build a strong and resilient, equitable recovery by making investments that support long-term growth and opportunity. And so when we get to the Q&A, I think you'll hear me referring back to this resilient and equitable investments that support a long-term growth opportunity and recovery. Those are the three top line objectives of the program. And in just a minute, we will get to allowable expenses under the Act. But I did want to talk just for a minute because at the height of the pandemic, the fallout in public sector employment rose all the way to 1.4 million lost jobs, including 1 million layoffs of educators. That's compared to 750 job losses during the Great Recession. So the impact that was felt in the public sector by this economic crisis cannot be overstated. We are proud to report and note that Upper Darby Township did not lay off any workers and has not had any reduction in the workforce or in services. So that's an uncommon statement. That's something that we're very proud of here. And as the mayor mentioned, one of the big parts of the administration's plan is to provide premium pay, in fact, to thank and recognize the efforts of the workers during this time. So those are important broader objectives. Now, what I'd like to do is turn to the next slide and talk about the allowable categories or the eligible expenses under the program, because obviously when everyone hears these large numbers, it's very tempting to think about all of the wonderful things that can be done with this kind of investment in our community. But it is important to note that the federal government has prescribed these four categories for investment. So the first category is for providing government services up to the amount of revenue loss due to the pandemic. And the interesting thing about this category is you don't actually have to have experienced lost revenue because of the pandemic, although most, if not all, municipalities have experienced lost revenue. This, and you'll see this later in the budget, this category is the product of a formula provided by the federal government where they are allowing a given 4% increase in revenue year over year, and then allowing you to calculate your lost revenue against that 4% revenue increase, whether you actually experienced the 4%, whether you actually experienced the 4% revenue gain or not. And so we'll talk more about that when we get to the budget. The second category, of course, makes a lot of sense, responding to COVID-19's public health impacts, along with its economic harms. So this is an area where you can use funds to support community nonprofits, support small businesses, do things like provide vaccine clinics and other public health mitigation efforts. And we'll talk more again about our specific ideas for this category. I do want to note that that's important. While we have made a presentation to council, which is to say we've given them a proposed budget, it's very much a proposal. It's very much a draft, and that's why you'll see the term draft. We wanted to have this meeting and hear from the public. We want the public to participate and attend the council meetings. We want to hear from the council. So please don't look at any of this as set in stone. This is very much meant to be a collaborative process where we all look and try to understand what is and is not allowable under the act, and what the best way forward for our community is. Third category, we've talked a little bit about offering additional support to workers who bear the greatest risks because of their service in critical sectors. Interesting to note here, we absolutely plan to do this, and we're very excited about being able to do it for our workers because they have done an incredible job. Just on a personal note, I happen to, well, I don't know if I should say this, but it was in the newspaper. So my wife was pregnant during the first wave of the pandemic, and I was coming to work every day, and it was incredibly nerve-wracking. And I just know that there are so many personal stories. Our police, our firefighters, our sanitation workers, our code enforcement officers, our tax office, these folks are coming to work every day and interacting with the public and keeping the township running and providing services. So it's really wonderful to be able to provide them this premium pay. It's interesting to note that while the American Rescue Plan was passed in March, we've been working on what's called the interim final rule in terms of guidance from the federal government. So part of the reason that we've been very deliberate about supplying a plan and getting funding going is the actual final rule, the final guidance from the federal government on how this money can and cannot be spent actually won't go into effect until April 1st. So we still have another 2 months working under interim guidance from the federal government where people are still trying to determine, is this category, does this fit into one of the categories? Will this be an eligible expense? And so that final rule guidance just came out less than a week ago and will not actually go into effect until April 1st. So it's created an environment of uncertainty where local governments don't know what is and isn't allowable. So that's something that we've been working on behind the scenes to make sure we spend the money appropriately. We have, and this is probably a good time to mention this, we have gotten questions in the past about why we got the allocation that we did. And I think this is an important time to mention it because we're a direct entitlement recipient from the federal government. So in Delaware County, Haverford Township, the city of Chester, and Upper Darby receive direct federal money in the form of HUD grants and community development block grants. Every other municipality in the county receives those funds through the county. They don't receive them directly from the federal government. And it's absolutely wonderful for our community that we have that direct relationship with the federal government. It's part of the reason that our allotment of American Rescue Plan funds is as large as it is. And so that part of it is fantastic. But it does mean that we're subject to a higher level of scrutiny when it comes to auditing our expenses and auditing our books from the federal government. And so that's why you're seeing the administration take extra precautions and be extra deliberate to ensure that our expenses will be allowable under the federal guidelines, because we have other direct federal money that could be impacted if we're not spending federal money correctly. And so I anticipate that in the days and weeks ahead, there'll be more questions about that, but I did want to make that clear about the final rule and when it will go into effect, as well as our direct relationship with the federal government, and both the positives and negatives of having that kind of direct relationship with the federal government. So the fourth allowable expense category, and one that the mayor mentioned during her remarks as well, providing critical water and sewer projects along with high-speed broadband infrastructure. So in Upper Darby Township, we have a vast storm sewer and water treatment sewage waste system underground. It's largely unseen, right? You don't think about the sewers until the storm sewer backs up, or the sewer main backs up, and then you've got a serious problem. But as we all know, we've recently experienced some significant flooding events, and because Upper Darby is a historic community, because a lot of our infrastructure was built 50 to 100 years ago, that includes our sewer system. And most of that sewer system is terracotta clay pipe. And it's a great material, and it certainly was a great material 100 years ago, but it's a natural material. So over time, that terracotta clay pipe deteriorates. And in the last 20 or 30 years, we have not seen the kind of investment in our sewer system that's really required. And so that's the reason that you're going to see really significant investments to upgrade and improve and frankly fix major components in our water and sewer systems. And that goes back to that third purpose, long-term investments that provide a resilient recovery, right? If we want to continue to attract good businesses and good residents to Upper Darby, we need infrastructure that functions. We need to be able to tell people that their business and their home aren't going to be flooded out, that we have capacity in our sewers for redevelopment and construction. So that's a really important aspect of the program that we've put forth, and we'll be very interested to get the feedback on that. So now I will go to the next slide, and we can talk a little bit more in particular. So in the neighboring communities, the Haverfords and Springfields of the world, who have already possibly passed their ARP plans, this is the sort of top line budget that you would see and that was voted on by their councils. And you can see this was delivered to our township council at a public meeting on January 5th. Again, one of the main eligible expenses, revenue replacement, you see $6 million there. Again, this is not a number that was pulled out of a hat or dreamed up. This is the product of the calculation based on a formula provided to us by the federal government, 4% increase in revenue versus actual revenue equals lost revenue. And the interesting thing is you are allowed to make this revenue calculation year over year. This $6 million actually just represents a single year for Upper Darby. So in future budgets, you will see this revenue replacement calculation again made over time for Upper Darby Township. I think it's also important to note, and the mayor alluded to this, these funds are being allocated in two, what they call tranches, 2 steps. Essentially, we'll get 2 installments, each for about $20 million. We've already received the first one. We anticipate receiving the second one later this year. And at that time, we'll have another public meeting and more public input and another presentation before council. But I did want people to know that it's not as if we have all this money right now. We're expecting a second installment. And that second installment will come after that April 1st when the final rule actually takes effect. Second category here, another $6 million, flood mitigation and sewer upgrades. You know, this, again, I've talked a little bit about it, but if people are familiar with the last few months and the flooding that we've seen at Marshall Road and 69th, at other places along Marshall Road, at Nailers Run, we have serious flood issues in Upper Darby at this point, which, you know, we're very fortunate to have Darby Creek and Nailers Run and Cobb's Creek. These are beautiful natural amenities that the mayor is committed to supporting and developing with stream bank restoration and other important stormwater management projects. But this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for us to correct decades of deferred maintenance and lack of investment in some of this infrastructure. The other important thing, and you'll see this when we get to the more detailed part of the budget. Folks may not know, we have 3 sewer authorities in Upper Darby, right? Part of what being the 6th largest municipality in the Commonwealth means is that we have a lot of infrastructure and we support and interact with a lot of our neighbors. So we're a part of 3 sewer authorities, which means we have multiple interceptors, which are large connection points for the sewer system. In the storm sewer, the Fernwood connection, it has been in disrepair and has been costing the township a lot of money. And so this will be an opportunity to really correct and repair that connection. And on the sewer side, the Cobb's Creek interceptor, we take sewer flow from Milbourne, Radnor, and Haverford Township, and it flows through that interceptor in Upper Darby to be treated in Philadelphia. And that's actually a source of revenue in some ways. It has a cost to the township, but we do also bill those neighboring municipalities when flow goes through that interceptor. So again, lots of deferred maintenance, very expensive piece of underground infrastructure to invest in there. Next category, critically important, police and fire. This actually also includes EMS, our ambulance service, which we partner largely with the Crozier Health System to provide. There will be more detail, but this is one of the main eligible expenses. We have a lot of necessary upgrades in terms of our fire apparatus, in terms of the ambulances that Crozier is using. And this is also an area where we can not only invest in tangible things, but we want to invest in crime prevention and violence mitigation. Unfortunately, Upper Darby is no different than the entire country, where the pandemic has seen a spike. There's been a national rise in violence, largely attributed to the pandemic. But I don't know that anybody could honestly pinpoint the exact reasons. We've done well in Upper Darby. Our men and women in the police force have an amazing clearance rate when it comes to criminal activity. And we have not actually experienced the kind of dramatic rises that many other communities across the country have experienced. But we think it's important to invest in mitigation programs and help us stem the tide and make sure that we don't experience those dramatic increases, and make sure that we're investing in community relations that will help us address those things. Next category is COVID relief and negative economic impacts. This is where you see investments in our local nonprofit communities. investments in our small businesses. It's not just municipal governments who have experienced lost revenue, but the small business community has been hit very hard. I mean, if you aren't personally impacted by it, I would actually be surprised. Almost everybody knows someone who runs a small business, and or maybe the small business you've interacted with has had to close down because they haven't been able to find workers, or their workers have been impacted by COVID and not able to come to work. So providing relief to our small business community is very important here. Providing relief to our nonprofit community, who also provide services, is very important here. And this is where you see premium pay for our workers. In addition to premium pay for our workers, you also will see a vaccine incentive for our workforce, because we want to do everything we can to keep our workers and our residents safe. So in addition to the premium pay, the administration is trying to provide an incentive payment for anyone who has already received the vaccine or anyone who will receive the vaccine after this plan is approved. Final category, it says parks and public spaces, and that is what it means, but I think it's really much wider ranging than that. I think we've all experienced the mental health impacts of being separated from our friends and family, having to quarantine if you've come in contact with the virus or been diagnosed with the virus, but just generally the lack of human contact, the lack of ability to be with one another. It's so important that we have outdoor spaces, that we have parks and public spaces where people can get exercise and get fresh air and have the opportunity to interact with friends and loved ones when it's difficult to be inside. So that's why parks and public spaces are included as an eligible expense. As with anything with the federal government, there are restrictions. So you can acquire open space, you can convert open space to a park or a playground, but it's not simply, it's not as simple as you can just use the money for anything park and playground related. And again, that's one of those things that goes back to the final rule and the interim final rule and our ongoing effort to understand what is and is not eligible for expense with this money. But the acquisition of open space and the conversion of open space to usable park and playground space, those are really important things that we believe are eligible expenses, and that's why they've been included in the budget. So on the next slide, you'll be able to see more detail about about these things. You know, again, I really do want to emphasize, we presented this to council at a public meeting on January 5th. Council will have multiple opportunities to review this and provide feedback in public. We're hosting this meeting. People have been submitting questions for about a week. People are still able to submit questions as we talk about it. And this is a proposal. This is a draft. You know, this is based on things that we've seen other communities doing, things that we think are important for our community. It's also based on our best understanding of what is and is not eligible according to the federal guidance. Some of these things I already talked about, but I do want to highlight, you know, this is an opportunity. I mean, $1 million for a gun violence prevention initiative could have a dramatic impact on the long-term future of Upper Darby. We need to give our residents a peace of mind that their community is safe and that they are safe here. And we need to give prospective residents and prospective business owners and prospective shoppers, right? We want to attract people to come to Pilgrim Gardens and 69th Street and Long Lane and Fern Boulevard. And if we're investing $1 million in gun violence prevention, we feel that sends a very strong signal and will help create that long-term resilient recovery that the federal government is trying to promote here. Similarly, $1 million for the nonprofit community. We talked a little bit about the mental health impacts of the pandemic. And so anything that we can do to support nonprofits that are helping people deal with mental health impacts, we think that's a very important investment. Same thing with the homelessness crisis. The pandemic has seen an increase in people experiencing homelessness, and we've made great progress. We worked very closely with the county to issue an RFP and get a nonprofit to come to Upper Darby and create wraparound rapid rehousing services. But it's not enough, right? We need to continue to support that effort. And so that's why you see a significant investment being made there. And to go back to parks and public spaces, you know, these are broad categories, but again, the federal government is restrictive. Keep in mind, we've had conversations in public about efforts to acquire and preserve things like the Thompson Tract or the Mazzino Tract. This is an opportunity where we may be able to leverage this money to actually acquire those open spaces. And that open space will benefit not only the current Upper Darby community, but Upper Darby for generations to come. You know, we're very fortunate to have 85,000 residents and 126 miles of roadway in Upper Darby, and we've got beautiful Art Deco architecture and English Tudor architecture and wonderful things. But the reality is we don't have a lot of green space, and so the opportunity to use this money to acquire green space that will soften the township and improve our stormwater management and improve the mental health and public health of our residents, improve recreation opportunities. We think that's a really important investment for our community. Some of these other things I've already talked about, and I'll be very happy to talk about in the question and answer period. For people who don't know, about our EMS service, our EMS service is largely provided in partnership with the Crozier hospitals, and we've been in conversations with Crozier about that fleet. It's not a service that they charge us for. It is a service that they bill insurance companies for. So it's not that the service is free exactly, but it's not a service where Crozier charges the township money. And that's why they've asked us to invest in the ambulance fleet. And it's something that we're considering. It's something that we're talking to them about. It's something that we're talking to the county about. So, you know, those that's another aspect of how we might invest this money. I think I've probably given a lot of information here and a lot for people to think about. So what I'd like to do now is go to our last slide and start to get into question and answer. So people have been submitting questions for about the last week. So we do have some questions already on file, and we do have some questions coming in. So what I'll do is I'll just go through a couple of those questions that have already been submitted, and I'll ask Mayor Keffer. I'll ask Mayor Keffer if she would like to chime in as well as we're going through these questions. Important reminder here again. It would be wonderful if we were all in person, sitting in a room together, and able to raise our hands and talk back and forth. In this meeting, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So if you do want to submit a question, you do have the ability to submit that question through the Q&A function. And just so everyone knows, we're also streaming live on YouTube. We're recording the meeting, and it will be available on YouTube. We've also posted the link on our Facebook page. So we are doing everything we can to try to engage the public and get their feedback on this proposal. You will still have continued opportunity to submit questions and come to council meetings to provide feedback. So that's very important to Mayor Keffer, and I did want to reiterate that. So we have a couple of questions already submitted. First question, can some of the funds be used to improve business fronts along Westchester Pike to make the businesses more inviting? So that's an interesting question. I think taken in its most literal form, the answer to that question is probably actually no. But we are able to provide grants to small businesses to account for their lost revenue, right? And once we provide the grant to the small business, what they choose to do with it is up to them. And I do think that improving the facades is important. I know it's important to the mayor. I think I saw her just raise her hand. I imagine that she is going to talk a little bit about the facade grant program that we already have and how businesses might use their grants to improve facades. You're on mute, Mayor Keffer.
I am on mute. So just really quickly, that's a great question. Recently, we received a Keystone Communities grant for facade improvements. So we're running a pilot program on the unit block of Garrett. We want to expand that to every one of our neighborhood business districts eventually. I think Westchester Pike is a great location. It is, it's like one of our main gateways into the township. And like, as CAO Mangione was saying, the small business grants that we would like to give out through the ARPA funding could be used as a match for facade improvements. So
absolutely. So next question, can funds be used to create bilingual material for signage in the township as well as material about community resources? So I think the answer to this question is certainly yes, especially when it comes to services and things that mitigate the impacts of the pandemic or direct folks to resources with regard to the plan. And I think it's a great question and a really good use of funds for our township. If people remember, during the census, we printed census literature in, I think, 10 languages. And we continue to just make ongoing efforts to try to make multilingual resources available for folks who don't know. I mean, Upper Darby has always been a community of immigrants. It's prided itself on being a place that's very welcoming to new residents. We have a 24% foreign-born population. And so multilingual, bilingual resources are very important. And I think there are ways that we could use this money. Next question, what do you mean by premium pay and how much is the premium pay? So premium pay just simply means bonus pay on top of regular pay that's not tied to any kind of extra hours or thing like that. Basically a bonus pay. And excuse me, in terms of how much, we have estimates, which is how we came up with the budget, but we've not settled on a dollar figure. We plan to talk more with our bargaining units and our non-bargaining employees. As with all things, we plan to look at our peer communities and our aspirational peer communities. So if you see things that have been done in places like Springfield or Haverford or Lower Merion, you could expect that our goal is to be somewhere in line with those numbers. Let's see. Other questions. Okay, the mayor said earlier, as I understand it, this budget line by line must be approved by township council. If the money in a particular line item is not completely used, will it be returned to council before it can be allocated somewhere else? Yeah, so this is a good question, and it's sort of interesting about how the budget process works. This is applicable actually to our year over year regular operating budget as it is to this budget. So that first slide with the broad categories, that actually is the budget that council will be voting on and asked to approve. The line by line budget is meant to be supporting information and documentation for how we arrived at those top line budget categories. So the way the home rule charter lays it out, if money stays within its top line budget category, it does not need councilmatic approval to be reallocated or have the remainder spent. But if money is going to move from one top line category to another top line category, that's the circumstance where council would need to authorize that expenditure. It's the reason why, if you remember, at the end of this year and at the end of every calendar year, there's a budget reconciliation ordinance where the administration, again, not just this administration, but every administration asks council to move any necessary funding in the budget that has crossed over those broad category lines. Another question, and it's a good question, Bond Shopping Center also got flooded. Are you planning to upgrade that system? Absolutely. I certainly did not mean to exclude Bond Shopping Center when I was mentioning a couple different places where we experienced flooding. Certainly we know that Bond Shopping Center is a critical economic resource and shopping center for our township, and that there are flood issues there with Nailers Run Creek. So some of that investment certainly would be made in that area.
If I could
yeah,
just
go ahead, Mayor.
real quickly,
Sure.
there's a redevelopment plan through the school district just up the street from the Bond Avenue Shopping Center at 8201 Lansdowne Avenue, and a lot of stormwater, new stormwater infrastructure is built into that plan too. It's baked into the plan because any new development that we, the council had to vote on the land development plan, we want to adhere to the guidelines in terms of stormwater. And that'll help too, but we're going to do our own sewer main lining as well.
Absolutely. No, that's a great point. I mean, this budget dovetails with all of the administration's other priorities. And that's an example of what Mayor Keffer's saying, not just with the school district, but when any land development project has come before the administration, we've always worked with the developers to try to improve the stormwater management and improve the stormwater plan. So it's not that we have to do everything with this American Rescue Plan funding. This American Rescue Plan funding is just part of the larger agenda to address these issues. So that's a very good point. Next question, would the administration consider more money for stormwater management and less for parks and green space? $3 million for parks seems excessive given the recent flooding in the township. Sure, so I think the answer to that in some ways is yes, right? We're here to get public input and public feedback. We still need more input from council. And so the plan is very much a work in progress. I think what I would say, though, is that the acquisition of green space is an investment in stormwater management and curtailing stormwater runoff, right? Because if green space is allowed to be developed, it will create stormwater management problems. If green space stays green space, it helps us. So the acquisition of green space is fundamentally tied to dealing with the stormwater management issue. And so I think, again, this is just a proposal and we want public feedback, but I would ask everyone to keep in mind that the acquisition of green space is critically important to the stormwater management program for the whole township. The mayor is far more expert in that area than I am, so I don't know if you want to add anything, but yeah.
No, I think it's a great question, and we're going to consider it, of course, and again, deliberating with council to see what the priorities are going to be, but we, you know, our open spaces percentage is really low. It's close, you know, it's closer to 3% than 5%. So we're going to look for opportunities. And this, like Vincent said, it's not etched in stone.
Right.
So
Yeah.
thank you for asking that question.
Next question, please explain how you're going to use $1 million on gun violence. Great question, very important question. I had Superintendent Bernhardt in my office today, and we were talking about how we're going to go about this and how we're going to address it. I think some of these things we have really good ideas for in terms of increasing and improving our mountain bike unit and our canine unit, increasing our footbeat presence in all of our business districts all around the township, and investing in our community relations program, right? Part of, again, this fits into the mayor's overall agenda. So the idea of building a community center, one of the goals for that community center is to provide a space where we can improve police community relations, where we can engage young people. And so I think it's yet to be seen. Superintendent Bernhardt is committed to working with us to assess best practices and learn and implement programs that have proven track records and make sense. So some of it is fleshed out in specific, and some of it is yet to be determined. But it's an important issue and an important question. I do apologize, but I'm trying to move quickly so that we can address as many of people's questions as possible. Can funds be used to hire an ADA coordinator for Upper Darby Township? I'll be very honest. I'm not 100% sure of the answer to that question. I think it's certainly something that the administration is committed to. It's an idea that the administration likes. Mayor Keffer made sure that in our road program last year, for the first time in multiple decades, we included over $1 million in ADA compliant curb cuts and ramps. So again, for the first time in a long time, you're seeing high quality curbside infrastructure put in that is ADA compliant. Another investment that we've made is in redeveloping what used to be the old township library on the first floor of the township building. That's the only place in the township building where you really have proper ADA access. And so by creating an Upper Darby One Center where residents will be able to access all government services in an ADA accessible environment, Mayor Keffer has shown the administration's commitment to ADA compliance. So I will look into whether we could hire an ADA coordinator. The one thing I would say is this money is meant by the federal government to be spent. It's meant to be a one-time injection of economic stimulus and investment. So what they've said when you get into the guidance is, number one, all of the money must be spent by the end of 2024. So there's a use it or lose it aspect to this money. We need to spend it by the end of 2024. And then number two, it cannot be spent on recurring expenses, right? So everybody wants to know, can you lower taxes or can you hire more staff? And the thing about that is those things create year over year expenses, and this money goes away after 2024. So it's really not meant to fund things that have recurring expenses. And so I think that probably gives us a hint about the idea of hiring folks with this particular money. Let's see. We have a question about whether funds can be used to construct a skate park. So that's a really interesting question. It's certainly not a question that is addressed with specificity by the federal government, but for people who may or may not know, earlier last year, we did have a pop-up skate park at observatory playground. And it was incredibly well attended. It was incredibly fun and interesting. It attracted people, not just from Upper Darby, but from all over the region. I even met a few young people who came from Wilmington, Delaware, just to check out the new potential skate park. So I do think that we've received a grant for a comprehensive plan for all of our parks, and certainly providing a skate park as an amenity in our overall park plan is absolutely on the mayor's agenda. And one way or another, whether it's rescue plan money or capital improvement money, I do think that you can look forward to a skate park in Upper Darby going forward. It's interesting, again, the restrictions that they've put on that park money. They're very focused on open space. And so we just have to see, conversations with the federal government about what type of land is available and whether a skate park would fit into their definition. But again, it's on the mayor's agenda. We hear you, we see you, and yeah, we're going to be there for you.
Is that something that we have to wait for the final guidelines to come through, or we can be a lot clearer about what is allowed and what is not allowed with that spending?
Well, yes and no. I think there's only so much specificity that the federal government is going to get into, right? So what would really be ideal is if another community already constructed a skate park and had the federal government say, okay, that's an eligible expense. But again, in the absence of that kind of specificity, I think we'll be able to work with them to understand the guidance and whether it's rescue plan money or not. I think we saw enough community interest in that pop-up skate park that we would like to continue to proceed on that. So we do have another question about is COVID testing included in negative impacts and mitigation? And the answer is yes. One of the overall goals of the program is to address the public health crisis. One of the most important ways to address the public health crisis is, of course, testing. And so testing is absolutely something that can be done here. And we have in the past had pop-up testing at different facilities, the Watkins Center, Municipal Lot 1, and it is something that we're looking to do going forward, both for our workforce and for the residents. So that's an excellent question and definitely something that we're looking at in the plan. I don't know exactly where we are on time. Oh, okay. So look at that. That's great news because it's now 6:30 and we actually have exhausted the questions that were sent in, as well as the questions that people have asked during this virtual town hall. So I will turn it over to the mayor to say her final remarks and good night. But I did just want to once again express thanks to everybody who submitted questions, and thanks to everybody who is watching on YouTube. Thanks to everybody who's participating. It really is important to get the public's input. It's something that the federal government really wanted us to do. And again, this is being live streamed on YouTube. It's being recorded. It will be available. You will be able to come to Township Council meetings to provide further input. So we look forward to hearing from you. And I apologize if I spoke quickly, but I wanted to get as much information out to the public as possible. So thank you very much. And with that, Mayor Keffer.
So thank you, CAO Rangione. I can't believe that you can talk for that long. Right, no, you have a really good grasp of the material because you created this budget along with our Deputy CAO, Allison Dobbins. You guys put in countless hours working with our department heads to get their wish list for for these ARPA funds. And I want to thank you people that are watching or will watch. And if you have questions, we really would like to hear. And we want everyone to have a good understanding of this. This is a real historic opportunity for us we can do a lot of good with this money. It'll be impactful for years and decades to come. And we want people to be happy with it. Again, we want above ground projects so we can see an impact, and the below ground projects that it would just be great to get ahead of on them, you know, and then we can use future money for other things. So that's all I really have to say. I think this is really great. Thank you for everybody who's like, again, watching or will watch, or, you know, this is a part of the process, and we're glad that you can be a part of it. So have a good night.